AV booth. Can you just let us know when the YouTube is going, please?
Yep, you should be good to go.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rebecca Monroe, and I am a Strategic Business Advisor for the Town of Oakville. I'm joined here today by the Parking Management Strategy Project team, consisting of other members of the Town of Oakville and R.J. Burnside and Associates. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that Oakville is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis, from the lands of the Anishinaabe and the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we are in solidarity with Indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect the four directions, lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors that walked before us, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that would exist. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for being stewards of this traditional territory. We would like to welcome you to the first public meeting this week for the townwide parking management strategy. Today's public meeting focuses on the commercial districts, which include downtown Oakville, Kerr Village, and Bronte Village. The purpose of this public meeting is to introduce the study, provide an update on the strategy so far, and to get feedback from you on the parking-related issues and challenges you currently face in the commercial districts. Through this study, the town will be considering solutions to meet parking demand while supporting and promoting good urban design, enhanced economic development, and encouraging alternative forms of transportation. The second public meeting will be held tomorrow and will focus on the North Oakville residential areas, which are north of Dundas Street. Before I hand this presentation over to Ray Backey from R.J. Burnside and Associates, I would like to note that the presentation slides and a question and answer sheet will be made available on the town website in the coming days. You can submit questions throughout today's presentation by typing it into the Q&A box on the screen or by emailing us at enforcement@oakville.ca. At the end of the presentation, there will be a question and answer period, and we'll go through as many questions that we can. If we're unable to answer your question at this meeting, please look for them to be included in the question and answer sheet. A survey will also be made online on the town website to gather additional feedback on parking related concerns in the commercial district. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ray. Thank you.
Oh, jumped ahead a slide there. Thank you, Rebecca. We have about 30 slides that I'll walk through today. We'll introduce the discussion with the study's scope and purpose and review of the objectives of the town, both operational and strategic as it relates to parking and broader town aspirations. We'll identify the study approach and how this consultation feeds into the project process. We've collected data related to parking utilization within the commercial areas, which we'll summarize and we'll discuss both those surveys and public surveys, which we've received input on some of your thoughts to date. The presentation will outline some of what the data collection and surveys have indicated related to parking needs and opportunities. And finally, we will present some preliminary alternative strategies that are under consideration and discuss how you can provide additional input. So I just wanted to note that to allow all of you who are attending tonight to provide live input, we've included a few questions to poll participants and give you a sense of the opinions of your fellow residents. To participate, you can either hold your smartphone over the with the camera on over the QR code on the screen and click the pop-up. So you can do that now. Or you could visit slido.com and enter the code shown here, which is 408319. So after following these instructions, you'll be directed to a page that will say no active polls at this time, which is what it's supposed to say. And as we get to those polls throughout the presentation, please respond with the most appropriate answer and hit send. And I just want to note that depending on the length of the question and the size of your phone, you may have to scroll down and hit send before hitting send. Alternatively, if you don't have a smartphone handy, feel free to enter responses to the questions in the chat box, as Rebecca had noted. So I'll just wait a second, and again, if you choose to, feel free to use your smartphone and hover over the QR code on your screen and click the box as it pops up. Okay, and this project is being led by the Town of Oakville Municipal Enforcement Services in cooperation with the Planning Services Department. Hanya Ellison and Kate Coburn are the town's project managers providing oversight of this project, along with Jill McInnes and Margaret Boswell, in addition to Rebecca and myself. My name is Ray Backey. I'm a Senior Vice President at RJ Burnside and Associates, and a project manager for this assignment, consultant project manager for this assignment. Gordon Huey is our Senior Transportation Planner. Gordon and I will be leading our consulting team, providing support to the town. The town of Oakville has conducted parking studies of the commercial areas periodically over the last 20 years to assess the operational needs and to identify changes in regulations. This study is intended to develop a parking strategy in the downtown, Kerr Village, and Bronte Village, to develop a strategy for the next number of years that addresses operational and planning and strategic needs for the town. The town and other municipalities are challenged with providing and managing the parking supply in a manner that serves the public and specifically the needs of adjacent land uses. There are a range of operational objectives of parking, both publicly owned and privately owned. It is, generally speaking, it is desirable that parking is provided in close proximity to the destination land use, so that it's convenient and accessible for those with mobility limitations and is secure, particularly at night. Parking is provided with sufficient capacities such that demand can be met and illegal parking does not affect traffic or pedestrian operations. It's desirable that parking is available such that parking supply is in a location that is close to the parking need. Otherwise, people tend to drive around looking for other spaces, which is not a sustainable operation. Parking duration is, it's desirable that parking duration is appropriate, where the time limits match the needs of adjacent land uses, such that regulations aren't so short that you don't have enough time to shop or go to the restaurant, and that they're not so long that vehicles are parked next to shops all day and others can't use those parking spaces. And it's also desirable that parking space sizes are appropriate to be usable and accessible. These operational issues, these are the operational issues that the town must contend with. But there are also strategic objectives that the town strives towards. Town council has passed policies that support sustainability, that discourage the provision of additional parking capacity and space allocated to parking in order to achieve strategic goals, including the town passed climate change sustainability policies that discourage automobile use and explicitly reference limiting parking. The town strives to limit the amount of hard surface constructed, such as parking facilities, to manage the amount of storm runoff. And the amount of land that's dedicated for parking is a capital and operating cost of the town. The town's strategic objectives were documented in recent town strategy reports, including the downtown mitigation strategy supporting convenience for visitors in the downtown, the community energy strategy committing to GHG or greenhouse gas reduction targets, and the urban mobility and transportation strategy focused on shifting parking demand to other modes. So there is a need to align this parking strategy, which we're conducting, with other town initiatives. So we are now at our first question. So hopefully a number of you have your phones handy or can either type something into the chat box. So if you have logged into Slido on your phone or your computer, you can vote to this question: where do you reside? Bronte Village, Kerr Village, downtown Oakville, elsewhere in Oakville or outside of Oakville. And for those of you, just a reminder to scroll down if necessary before you hit send to vote. And just another note, we recognize that this is not a statistically significant survey result, rather more of a poll that provides a snapshot of some of the feedback of others who live or visit in the commercial areas. So we have roughly half of the respondents so far are within Bronte or the downtown area, live within those areas, and others who live elsewhere and may be visiting in the commercial areas. And we'll give it another couple of minutes here, or a minute or so, just to see. But it does give us a snapshot as to who's logged in and listening and providing some questions to us as we get toward the end of the presentation. Okay, I think we'll move on. There'll be a number of more questions here, but it does give us a good little snapshot of the profile of the folks online. So our second question is just to get a sense of the frequency of visiting of the commercial areas. When was the last time you visited one of these three areas? In the past week, in the past month, in the past 6 months, or in the past year? And as we note that quite a number of people are residents in either the downtown or in Bronte. So it's not surprising that most people have visited within the past week, and at least in the past month for most. Okay, let's move on. So this, just to give a little bit of understanding of the background and what we've been doing all this time. The study has involved a review of previous data and a fairly extensive collection of previous information, including public surveys, an employer survey, a review and field data collection of public space, occupancy counts, turnover counts is basically how many vehicles will use a space in a day or how long they'll stay, and some site observations. So this public meeting is intended to both inform you of our interim results and collect additional input. Following this meeting, we'll confirm and assess the alternative strategies and document a draft parking management study report. So turning to our data collection, the timing of the study, of course, has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. There were periods of shutdown when many commercial businesses were not operational or were functioning at a fraction of the normal demand. This affected parking, of course, and the timing of the parking counts and surveys. So we did plan to conduct the surveys in the fall of 2021 to allow analysis and this public meeting prior to the summer. So the occupancy and turnover counts were conducted in October and November of 2021 when conditions began to return toward the pre-pandemic demands. We recognize that the conditions hadn't fully returned. We also conducted surveys of the public, employees and business owners, maybe some of you, in February of this year, again, when conditions appeared to be returning after the spike in January. Our findings are summarized in the next half dozen slides. The large map on the left shows the downtown and provides data during the highest weekday hours, which is midday in the downtown. We've documented the occupancy of on-street parking spaces shown as lines on this map, and off-street parking lots shown as blocks on this map. The percentages shown indicate the maximum parking utilization. The numbers are a little hard to see, but they're basically the colors tell the story. Red indicates fully utilized. Orange indicates that over 90% of the spaces are full. Green and yellow indicate that there is some or a fair bit of reserve capacity. And it can be seen that the on-street spaces, parking spaces in the downtown, are close to fully utilized, so they're red or they're orange, and that's not surprising because they're the easiest to get to and often most convenient and close to the destinations. The off-street lots, the blocks between Dunn and Navy, are also fully utilized and pretty much 100% utilized on the north side of Lakeshore. However, the further you get away from the center of the downtown, utilization is lower, and to the point where along Water Street, the utilization is in the 10 to 25% utilized range. Overall, balancing the utilization within the downtown, the highest average utilization, this is considering all of the spaces, is approximately 75%, as seen in the table in the upper right-hand corner, which is sufficient to meet demand. And typically within traffic engineering, parking engineering, you want to maintain demand with some reserve capacity, 10 or 15%, just so that vehicles can get in and get out, and there's efficient operation. So we are seeing demands that are below that level. The conditions are similar. This is for weekdays, and the conditions are similar, but slightly lower on weekends, and that's illustrated. You probably can't see it, but illustrated in the lower right-hand corner. We've collected the same type of data for Kerr Village. The maximum weekday on-street parking is above 80% for a number of blocks between Westside Drive and Stewart Street and along Lakeshore. As you can see, with a lot of green boxes, that the off-street lots have low utilization, and overall Kerr Village parking demand is approximately 50% of capacity, and is sort of at the maximum point in the off-street lots and on-street. Similar conditions, again, are experienced on weekends. So with Bronte Village, weekend demand and on the weekend demand in the off-street parking lots have been considered, have seen considerable reserve capacity and supply. Demand is less than 50% of capacity. And sorry, this is the weekday. Weekend is quite similar. And the on-street spaces have sufficient capacity with the exception of Bronte Road, south of Lakeshore Road. So those sections of red immediately south of Lakeshore on Bronte. And on Jones Street, similarly on Jones Street south of Marine Drive, there are some red sections there. So the parking is at capacity, or actually the vehicles are parked very, very closely together relative to the amount of space that's on those sections. So we move now to our next question. What kind of trips do you usually make to these commercial districts? And you could maybe check all that apply. It's business, dining and leisure and entertainment, service, medical and appointments, visiting friends or family, going for a walk or other. So I think basically everybody who's online and responding, clearly it's a destination for dining and entertainment and leisure activities. It does give us a picture of the rationale of the destination. Okay, we'll just move on then. Next slide. We've considered the parking costs in the downtown incur, and there are, in addition to hourly charges, there are monthly parking permits that may be cost effective for regular visitors or employees in these districts. The rates range from just under $40 to $62 to just over $100 per month for the Church Street parkade. So with that in mind, and in consideration of the parking utilization numbers that we saw and the range of utilization, it brings us to our next question. If you had a monthly parking permit, or you were considering a monthly parking permit in downtown Oakville or Kerr Village, what statements would best indicate why you would use the monthly parking permit for work, visiting the area often for shopping and dining, leisure trips, visiting family? So we are seeing really a range of rationale for using the permit. And we're seeing that 60%, which makes sense, that people are there for business or either own a business or employed in a business in the downtown area, or occur just there may be efficiencies and costs there. Okay, great. And I'm just going to move on to another question. And this is a question about proximity and cost. Would you consider a parking permit, and whether you have one or would possibly consider one, would you consider a parking permit that required an additional 5-minute walk if you could pay less? And this may go to some of the strategies that we'll see in later slides, and that the town may consider as we move forward. And of course, not everybody would be in a position to make that longer walk, just depending on mobility considerations. Okay, great. Okay, so now we've held out, as I mentioned, a public survey with a number of questions that have been filled out by quite a number of members of the public, employees, and employers back in February. It was I guess the summary is here. There was a fairly good response, 445 commercial visitor responses, and 86 employee or employer responses that were received. And we have sort of broken down the types of responses by the different groups. So from From a visitor perspective, the comments included just the concerns over towing in private lots in the Bronte Village, and I know there's some commercial, private commercial stores, the grocery stores there. There's some who are dissatisfied about the lack of free parking, and there was some requests for additional parking or concerns over the ability to find parking, and then specifically concerns over a lack of parking for the library employees. For the employee comments, there are concerns about the cost, and I guess for people who are there regularly throughout the week, and employees of other businesses parking on street and taking spaces away from potential customers. So that's some of the feedback, and we will be, as Rebecca had mentioned, that there will be additional surveys, or those surveys will be opened up again for additional feedback. A few other sort of observations from the surveys. This was a breakdown of the types of uses for visiting the commercial areas, which actually are quite similar to the responses that we've received tonight. Most visited the commercial areas for leisure and dining. About 15 to 20% went for appointments. So that's in keeping with what we've heard tonight. We've also, and this slide is maybe a little difficult to get your mind around, but I think what we would just simply say is that the parking duration, how long people are staying when they park, did seem to align with how long people were staying in the commercial parking space. So generally speaking, the longer you were parking, the further away you tended to park or were willing to park. So if you are parking for 1 to 2 hours or more than 2 hours, you were willing to park, you were more likely to park more than 1 kilometer away or half a kilometer to 1 kilometer away. So those purple and green lines are higher for those longer stays. If you were staying 5 minutes to 30 minutes or less than an hour, the green line and the purple line are shorter. So you are typically not as willing to walk that distance to a parking space. And also, if you were staying longer, survey respondents were more willing to park further away. So this is a very similar summary. So just the next couple of slides relates to needs and opportunities, a summary of needs and opportunities. We have identified the following operational needs of parking in the downtown, and we talked about proximity previously, and that parking is provided close to all land uses. Parking lots on Water Street are a little more remote, and as a result have lower demand. Capacity, in terms of capacity, overall parking supply meets the demand. So we were not in a situation where we are very close to or above capacity at any time. In terms of availability, there is high utilization in the parking lots between Navy and Dunn Street and on street. So in terms of availability, there are some challenges. In terms of duration, we did observe some non-compliance in the 20-minute spaces. So there's typically one space in the downtown on Lakeshore that is provided for quick turnovers, run in and drop something off or pick something up, spaces in each block. And there was some non-compliance, so people staying longer than 20 minutes in those spaces. So there, other than that, there was fairly good turnover, sufficient turnover of the spaces, especially on street, during the day. And in terms of space sizes, they all appear to be usable. And the one note was that there were public requests for more accessible spaces within the downtown areas. In terms of the strategic objectives, the following has been identified. The need for strategies that do not include additional parking supply, because that would be inconsistent with the direction of council. There is a need to leverage the existing parking supply by potentially redistributing parking demand efficiently. There is some opportunities, or there may be some opportunities for additional electric vehicle charging spaces. They currently seem to be sufficient, but as the fleet of vehicles in Oakville transition, the town will need to keep pace with that increasing number of electric vehicles. And in terms of temporary on-street parking, sort of there's a need for temporary on-street parking program for the growth in multi-residential buildings. Okay, next slide. So in terms of Kerr and Bronte, we have very similar observations in terms of proximity. Parking is limited along Bronte Road, Ontario Street, Lakeshore Road, and Kerr Street. The capacity, there's overall supply meets demand when in consideration of the areas as a whole. Availability, there's high utilization along Bronte, Ontario again, and Lakeshore Road and Kerr Street. The duration, there's general compliance of the parking duration limits. And again, the space sizes appear to be usable, and again, a request for more accessible spaces. In terms of strategic needs, there's a need for strategies that don't include additional parking spaces. Overall, the supply is sufficient. Same observations about EV charging requirements for additional spaces for future demand. There is incorporating additional parking requirements for new developments. Should consider or can consider shared parking to balance the demands of different uses. There are opportunities for enhancing wayfinding and ease of access to parking. And again, a temporary on-street parking program should be considered for multi-residential buildings, multi-unit residential buildings. So another question here, how do you find parking while visiting the commercial districts? Do you do it while driving? Do you have previous knowledge? Do you use old school paper maps, online maps, wayfinding signs? Most folks are very familiar with the areas. Wayfinding signs. And I have my 2 or 3 parking lots or parking areas that I tend to go to every time. So previous knowledge, that's not too surprising. Okay, just moving on, and this is, I guess, a little bit of a information update, and people may be aware of this, but the town has been quite progressive in developing technological tools. And over the last year, there have been efforts through Hanya's team to install parking sensors in the downtown. and that has now just recently been connected with an online map app to provide access to live utilization data. So in addition to other sources, you can certainly start to use this tool to get a better understanding of where available parking spaces are in the downtown. The town is also implementing wayfinding signage and recommendations related to that, and communication to the public, I think, will be forthcoming. So, alternative strategies. We do have some preliminary strategies moving forward. So from these investigations, we've identified a number of strategies for the commercial areas, including supply. So just in terms of supply, we're looking at the current supply and increasing enforcement of the 20-minute parking spaces to increase the turnover and availability of those spaces for those quick trips. To develop an electric vehicle charging parking space, parking demand strategy with forecasts of expansion of that program. A strategy for increasing the availability and proximity for drivers with accessible needs. In terms of promotion and communication, to promote the effective use of the 11X online tool. That's the sensor data platform or app, and introduction of on-the-ground wayfinding and mapping technology. So that is coming in as part of the town's current strategy. And in addition, there are opportunities to use regulation and pricing to redistribute parking demand. So review the permit parking allocation and prices. So perhaps the costs are cheaper further away where the utilization is lower. And consider dynamic pricing to reduce and balance the parking demand by locations and by time period. And then in terms of demand management, provide and promote transit in the commercial areas. So this is just again a quick little poll. What strategies, based on what you've just heard, do you think are the most important? Increase enforcement of the 20-minute parking spaces, expand EV charging, increase proximity and availability for drivers with accessibility needs, promote and expand the public available online sensor data, introduce on-the-ground wayfinding and mapping technology, review permit parking allocation and pricing, consider higher prices in high demand locations, or lower prices in low demand locations, and provide more transit to commercial areas. So we are seeing a range of responses. I think most of these responses are receiving some level of support. I think we may be truncating some of the choices down at the bottom, but there does seem to be a fair bit of support for most of these options. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of wrap up the slides here. So how can you get involved? You can start now. We'll be responding to any questions or comments made today at the conclusion of the presentation. Again, you can pop a question in the chat box. And whatever we don't get to today, we will respond to over the next few days and make sure that that's posted on the website. And if you wish, you can certainly reach out to Hanya or myself. Shoot us an email or let us know any thoughts or suggestions that you have. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for questions.
Okay, we do have several questions. So if you'll just bear with me, I will start asking them for you. Okay, so one of the questions we got was, did you consider that some of the lots are parking for business customers only? Cars that park because of shortages in these lots are being towed.
And I do believe, and especially in the Bronte area, we are aware of that. And the town staff for sure are aware of that and have been dealing with some of the feedback on that. I think that there may be opportunities there for a better understanding and communication, and I think that was a good point to make sure that individuals who are parking there know that those are private lots and they may be towed, but also to better understand where parking is available, accessible parking is available. And currently in the downtown, the app is a good tool for individuals to understand where that may happen, where that parking may be available. If the one option may be the sensor data is expanded through the commercial areas of the town and make that available for people to understand what the appropriate and legal options are.
Okay, next question. How has the growth of the population in Bronte been factored into this study?
It's a very good question. We are still looking at the supply and demand. We are forecasting. We're still in the process of forecasting parking demand from the surveys. So we will be incorporating the sort of a model of future land uses and the parking demand associated with those land uses and the parking supply associated with those land uses. So the numbers that we see and we've shown on the maps will be modified before we assess those alternatives in recognition of what may come over the next 10 or 20 years.
Thank you. Next question was, with EV charging stations being installed along Lakeshore, is usage of the charging stations and any data being collected and evaluated?
We have not within the study to date, and I don't know if anyone within the town staff can comment on whether the town has some of that data.
Hello, I'll take a chance at answering that. So with the the public EV charging stations in the commercial districts, many of them are just fairly new, recently installed over the last couple of months. We do have in downtown Oakville, not only do we have data of usage that we can get from the EV chargers themselves, but we actually have sensors, and we've identified those sensors specifically so we can look at parking utilization in those spaces to monitor how well they're being used, and that will help inform future decisions and look at when we'll need, when potentially we need to add more EV charging stations in the commercial districts.
Thank you. Okay, we have another one. How is this study factoring in accessible parking? Is this within the scope of the study?
I'll maybe start here in that we, as the slides have indicated, we have heard some feedback through the surveys, so that definitely has been recognized. The strategies, there will be alternative strategies considered to address the need, and certainly the proximity of parking spaces, accessible parking spaces to destinations is a requirement, a need that we have to consider. So we will be looking at the proximity of the accessible parking spaces to, each block and each potential land use destination within the commercial areas. The strategies we're still considering, and again, if there are suggestions or requests for developing a strategy to address those needs, we're definitely open to the public on that, and we are sort of looking at best practices, what other jurisdictions are doing.
Thank you. Okay, there are a few more. So there have been several comments suggesting that strategies will not include additional parking supply. If new spaces are not introduced, how will the study address the increase in vehicle traffic to the area?
So as it stands now, certainly in Curran and Bronte, the demands are quite a bit below the full capacity of parking. But even in the downtown, the demands and the peak times, considering all of the parking within the downtown, the demand is a fair bit below the capacity. And it may not appear that way because of the central area is so well used and very close to capacity. And the challenge is the redistribution or encouraging demand further to the parking spaces that are currently underutilized. I guess the earlier question about what about the future, and the hope is, and in our model will assess this, is the new demands associated with new development will come with some degree of a new parking spaces, new supply, and it's a balancing of that supply and demand, and ensuring that the new spaces for those uses are sufficient for that increase in demand for the land uses. I don't know if I answered that well, but certainly we'll be modeling it and balancing the additional demand and supply. When we say that there will be no additional supply in the area, it would be publicly provided spaces. Kate, I see your.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. So just to help put a planning point of view on this conversation around growth within our areas and the supply of parking as new growth is anticipated, there have been multiple updates to the growth areas that we have, Bronte and Kerr and downtown Oakville. And we do know that development will come, and there will be more people and more opportunities for retail and commercial uses within that space. There's only so much capacity within the street network of parking capacity. So as Ray mentioned, the opportunities to provide any additional supplementary parking for commercial uses would be within the private properties and through those developments as they come forward. That the expectation again is still to look at this as a balancing approach. As the density comes in and people live within these areas, the expectation being that they're less likely to need a vehicle to access entertainment and dining and restaurants and office uses or employment within these spaces. So they're less likely to create an increased demand on that supply as well, and leave it more for those that would be traveling outside of these areas. So that is, from a planning point of view, that is what we would be looking towards this strategy to better inform how we create that balance and make more supportive planning decisions around encouraging public transit usage, walkability, and other opportunities like cycling as well in these areas.
Got a couple around like the dates of our data being collected. So the first one is, what were the dates that the data was gathered?
So it varied. So in the previous slides, we had noted that the turnover and utilization surveys were undertaken in October and November. So the September, there was a sort of a bit of an opening up in September of last year during COVID. So that was really the opportunity there. Post-September, October, November conditions were a little more open. And again, things tended to shut down again sort of late November and December. So we were sort of finished our field surveys at that time, and then conducted the questionnaires of the public and the employers and employees in February. I don't have the exact dates handy, but those were the general months, and we did conduct the surveys over a number of days, and did average the sort of demand over those periods. So there were multiple days, at least 2, if not 3 days of surveys per location to sort of validate that. Now, the town with the centers, certainly in the downtown, have much more flexibility to continue to monitor demand. And as Hania has mentioned, that there is an opportunity there with the sensors to continually monitor demand in the downtown, and subsequent counts are anticipated later this year, as hopefully things are completely back to normal.
Thank you. We can also look to publish the exact dates the data was collected within our Q&A as well when we get with that. With that answer as well, there were a couple of questions around whether we factored in some of the COVID effects, but given that we are going to be doing ongoing data collection through the parking study, I won't answer those, but we'll put them in the Q&A just in interests of time.
Yep.
Do we have any idea on how far, with our predictions, what the kind of radius is that we would expect people to walk to shop, or to, we mentioned that there was like a reduced need for cars with our live work kind of vision. Do we have an estimate of what the kind of radius is that we would expect people to not need a car for? We
did ask that question. We have actually have surveyed that in other jurisdictions as well. We can provide some of that information. I don't have it offhand, but of course there is a range of what people feel comfortable walking. So there is somewhat of a distribution in what people will consider. And I think as we open the surveys up again, we would be, very interested in hearing what people's thoughts are.
Okay, looking through the rest of the questions, they all have already been somewhat answered or addressed, or like I said, the answers will come out as we do more parking study utilization with the parking parks. So as of now, there are no new questions. So given that we have 6 minutes left, I think that we are done with the questions and answers. We will put a Q&A up of everyone that's been asked. We'll put up a question and answer on the town website in the next coming days, along with these presentation slides. And as was mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, There will also be a survey being released again to gather more feedback. Ray, did you have any closing remarks?
No, we just want to thank everybody for your interest and your time tonight, and we're happy to hear from anyone that has further comments or questions.
If I can just jump in, sorry, I'm just seeing a question with respect to the mobility study. So the urban mobility and transportation study that was brought forward to council in February was a document that was presented to council that requires some additional review. That report was endorsed was received by council and was endorsed again to provide us with the lens to evaluate the options and make decisions that would provide the prioritization of balancing the town's transportation infrastructure. And as well, that this document that was provided will provide further guidance on the other upcoming master plans, as well as this parking strategy. So there is a relationship between the urban mobility transportation strategy and the parking strategy that we are working on currently. And we will continue to work in tandem with staff that are involved in that study and provide for ongoing communications to inform residents and employers within these areas to understand the balance of what we are to expect and what we are looking to strive to when it comes to balancing the interests of all of our transportation opportunities through public transit, walkability, cycling, as well as vehicular usage, and keeping in mind as well the lens of our climate change emergency strategic direction to better encourage less dependency on the motor vehicle and the combustion engine at that point as well. So that is something that we continue to look through and apply that lens as we continue with the parking strategy. And the mobility study in of itself will continue to evolve as well, and more information will be brought forward to council and to the public at the appropriate times as those studies continue. So I just wanted to provide that clarity. There was a couple of questions on the mobility strategy.
Okay. With 3 minutes to go, I just want to let everyone know that the survey is already available online at oakville.ca. And if you have any more questions that you want us to address in our Q&A, or you have any other comments, please feel free to email us at parking@oakville.ca and we'll get back to you. All right, I'd like to thank everyone for their time tonight. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but like I said, have a look online in the next couple of days and have a good evening. Thank you.